Hello, everyone. My name is Emily Haller, and I am a registered dietitian. I work with the Division of Gastroenterology at Michigan Medicine, and I'm very excited to be here with you today talking about a pretty hot topic, sugar, friend or foe. So let's get started. All right, there we go. So to begin with, what is sugar? Sugar is a generalized name for short chain, sweet, soluble carbohydrates. Sugars can be categorized as monosaccharides, meaning one sugar, or disaccharides, meaning two sugars. They can be naturally occurring or added to foods and come from various sources. So, naturally occurring sugars are found in foods like fruit, for example, fructose and glucose. And then milk also contains a natural sugar called lactose. Added sugars are sugars and syrup that are put into foods during preparation or processing. They can be added at the table or to different drinks, beverages. And some common sources of those are high fructose corn syrup, molasses, cane sugar, corn sweetener, and different fruit juice concentrates. So, first, I wanted to talk a little bit about sugar recommendations for general health. So it is recommended to limit refined carbohydrates and added sugars. So we're not talking about natural sugars here, definitely not talking about fruit, but limiting added sugars and refined carbohydrates is recommended because diets rich in these things, particularly added sugars, have been shown to promote inflammation and increase risk for the following conditions. So non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, insulin resistance and diabetes, high triglycerides, and heart disease, as well as cancer. So let's take a look at how much sugar we are eating. Well, the average American consumes a pretty significant amount of sugar, around 17 teaspoons, which is 68 grams of added sugar per day. So if we look over here at this pie chart on the right, we'll see that beverages, and we're not talking about milk or 100% fruit juice, but sweetened beverages contribute to the majority of added sugars, as well as snacks and sweets. The rest of these things are pretty small. So if we're trying to look at, are we consuming a lot of sugar? These would be the two categories to look at first. The American Heart Association recommends the following daily added sugar limit. So I'm not here to demonize sugar, not telling you that you can't enjoy some sweets and treats that you like. Those things can definitely fit. But looking at for males, about 9 teaspoons or 36 grams a day is a daily added sugar limit. And then for women, 24 grams or 6 teaspoons is what's recommended. Again, the good news, whole foods like fruits, vegetables, whole grains, nuts, seeds, and legumes do not have added sugars. And when we have these things in our diet, for the most part, we don't have to worry too much about going over these limits. So what about sugar and GI symptoms? Can sugars cause GI symptoms? This is a common question I get asked from my patients. And the short answer is yes, for some people, and it depends. So we're going to chat a little bit about specific sugar intolerances for the rest of this talk, and we're going to be going over these different sugars. So starting with sucrose and maltose as well as starch. There is a condition called congenital sucrase isomaltase deficiency, or CSID, that makes it difficult for a person to digest certain sugars, which are sucrose, also known as table sugar. And you can see over here that that is a disaccharide. It's made up of two sugars, glucose and fructose. Maltose, which is often found in barley malt, corn syrup, and rice syrup, also a disaccharide made up of two sugars of glucose. And then people who have CSID may also have a hard time with starch. And this is found, in a lot of common foods, potatoes, pastas, breads, all the good things. And there's a pretty complex digestion process behind this, but it's broken down to maltose and dextrin. And for us to be able to digest these sugars, we need an enzyme called sucrase isomaltase. And you can see over here in a normal intestine, when somebody's eating sugar and this enzyme is present, those two sugars are broken apart and they're able to be absorbed through the small intestine and metabolized by the body. Therefore, normal digestion. Now, if somebody doesn't have this enzyme, this sugar is not able to be broken down. So it swims down through the GI tract, it makes it to the large intestine, and we all have bacteria that live in our large intestine. That's normal. But these bacteria are going to ferment that sugar, and that can produce a lot of gas and bloating, pain, and it can lead to urgency, loose frequent bowel movements, or diarrhea. And all of those symptoms are common in many GI conditions, which we'll chat about a little bit at the end. But those are symptoms in somebody who has CSID, who's eating a lot of sugar or maltose and or starch. So if somebody has this, if you're diagnosed with this condition by your physician, then there are some treatment nutrition therapy options. So we can use a diet along with an enzyme called saccharose. This will help with sugar tolerance and digestion, or sucrose tolerance and digestion. And then if someone is not taking an enzyme, then we would have them limit their sucrose intake for a couple of weeks to assess how much they improve, and then reintroduce sucrose containing foods to really hone in on a person's specific tolerance. In terms of tolerating starch, there is not an enzyme for starch digestion. So this may need to be limited. And then there's also some tips and tricks that can be applied to try to improve starch tolerance. Some of those things look like boiling, cooking well starchy foods, rinsing them to rinse away some of the starch. Combining protein and fat with starch containing foods may improve tolerance. And then chewing foods well may also improve starch tolerance because there are enzymes in saliva that help break down starch. So moving on to FODMAPs. So FODMAP is an umbrella term for specific short-chain carbohydrates. It's an acronym. As you can see here, it's a mouthful: fermentable oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and polyols. Again, these are short-chain carbohydrates or short-chain sugars. They can be poorly absorbed in the small intestine, just how we looked at that sucrose example earlier. And if they're delivered to the large intestine, they can be rapidly fermented by gut bacteria, producing a whole host of symptoms. They can draw water into the GI tract, which can also increase urgency, diarrhea, loose frequent bowel movements. So let's look at each one of these individually. Lactose is a sugar that's found in dairy products. It's a disaccharide, and it's normally broken down by an enzyme called lactase. Lactose intolerance is very common. About 65% of the world's population is somewhat lactose intolerant. And so if you don't have this enzyme, you will have an impaired ability to digest lactose, which will lead to a lot of GI symptoms. So the treatment for this is one to find your specific tolerance level, right? Different dairy products have different levels of lactose. So for example, milk has the most lactose, whereas something like hard cheese or butter, those are essentially lactose-free or very, very low lactose. Or something like a yogurt or Greek yogurt is kind of middle of the road. So finding, again, a specific tolerance level can be important. There are also alternatives available. So soy milk, almond milk, there's different plant-based yogurts, ice creams, you name it. If dairy isn't your thing or you feel like you're very sensitive, there's pretty much a workaround for every product. You can also try the use of an enzyme. A lactase enzyme would provide you that enzyme. You take it at the time that you're consuming regular dairy products, and that may help improve your tolerance. You can also buy products available in most grocery stores that have already been treated with the enzyme, and those are, for example, lactose-free milk. There's also some research to say or to show that probiotics and prebiotics may help with lactose intolerance as well. Fructose, also a FODMAP. This is the monosaccharide found naturally in fruits and honey. It's in some veggies, and then it's also added to various products, which you may be familiar with: high fructose corn syrup, for example, or crystalline fructose. The ability of the human intestine to absorb fructose is limited. So if consuming too much at one time, this can create symptoms for certain people. There's also people who have fructose malabsorption and are very sensitive to high fructose intake. If this is the case, you're going to notice a lot of the interventions are similar. It's going to be first to limit intake, see if this helps with symptoms, and then to try to reintroduce certain foods to find a specific tolerance, right? Find what specifically works for you, or in my case, what works for my patients when I'm working with them. If needing to avoid high fructose foods, there are, again, various fruits and vegetables and different sweeteners. And then anytime, I'm talking with someone about avoiding food, right, that may be their trigger, we also want to think about what can we have instead. So, for a list of fruits, we're going to put these on hold. We would also want to focus on what fruits don't have excess fructose, what could be added in place of the things that we're taking out. There's not really an enzyme to take for fructose malabsorption or intolerance, so it's more about limiting, finding a specific tolerance, and foods that work for you. Oligosaccharides, also a short chain carbohydrate, also part of the low FODMAP diet, but technically not a sugar. So these are very common in our diet. They're found in things like wheat, rye, and barley, garlic and onions, beans. And the intolerance here is that no humans make the digestive enzymes to completely break these down. So these are fermented in everybody. That's normal, that's healthy. However, some people may be more sensitive to this, primarily people who have irritable bowel syndrome or IBS. And in the case that if we find we are sensitive to the fructooligosaccharides or galactooligosaccharides, um, or the fructans, the FODMAP, specific FODMAP group, the intervention would be to limit intake as much as needed, try to add them back to find a specific tolerance. There is some interesting research to show people with IBS who reacted to the beans, the galacto-oligosaccharide group, could take a digestive enzyme called alpha galactosidase. It's the same enzyme that's in Beano. So taking that at the same time of eating beans can help improve tolerance and lessen symptoms. So that's always an option. Beano's one. I've listed some other enzymes up there on the slide that you may find in a grocery store, health food store, or online. And then, of course, finding alternatives that work. So if somebody reacts to wheat bread, a sourdough bread is a good option, workaround. Garlic infused olive oil in place of regular garlic, green onion tops, chives, etc. So last but not least, sugar alcohols, also known as polyols, are a naturally occurring carbohydrate. These are sweeteners that have about half of the calories of a regular sugar. They are found naturally in nature in the forms of sorbitol and mannitol. They're in apples and apricots, avocado, cauliflower, peaches, plums, and prunes. And then they're also found in sugar-free products like sugar-free gum and sugar-free candy. So you can see over here in the table, a good way to spot sugar alcohols on a label is to look for that OL, sorbitol, xylitol, mannitol, maltitol. And the intolerance here is that these can have a laxative effect. Some people are, sensitive to a small amount, and then generally, most people, if you consume a large amount of these sugar-free alcohols, that they can have a laxative effect in almost anyone. That can be seen if you go to the Amazon reviews of sugar-free gummy bears. There's some pretty comical reviews talking about some of the side effects that they can elicit. So the treatment and alternatives here are to limit intake initially, find a specific tolerance level. If you do find that you react to sugar-free alcohols and products, the alternative is to use actually real sugared gum. There's several companies that make them out there, or use real sugared candy and not the ones that are sugar-free. And then there are some fruits and veggies, again, that can be limited or avoided as needed. So to wrap things up, I want to leave you with some unsugar-coated advice. If you are having GI symptoms and you think you have, a sugar or carbohydrate intolerance, please work with a physician for a proper workup, diagnosis, and ongoing care. If you are struggling with what to eat and you do have a sugar or other food intolerance, please work with a GI dietitian. While goals are specific to each individual, I find a lot of times the things that I'm working on in clinic with my people is that we're trying to expand the variety in diet while minimizing symptoms. And last but not least, please enjoy foods, including some with added sugars that you tolerate. Thank you very much, and I hope you found this helpful and enjoyed my talk.